Princesh, formal
Yes,
start.
sir. Yes, sir. It is visible, sir.
Okay, so welcome to this session. Good evening, everyone. Welcome, my dear students. Welcome to this orientation camp once again, to this particular session, especially. And what I'll be taking you is through a tour of what is there in Indian ancient knowledge system, which has seeds of for modern knowledge and computer science in particular and engineering in general. So welcome to this particular session, and let's hear some story from me. And I'll not be telling you something specific. I'll be just giving you a glimpse of our glorious past and obviously our glorious future, which are you. So I'm here to connect our glorious past to our brilliant and glorious future. And here you are trying to do your BTech in IT or BTech in Electronics and Communication Engineering, and both BTech in IT, BTech in Computer Science, BTech in Electronics and Communication Engineering, my dear students, are branches which are based on ideas. And you dirty your hands in the lab, but you also can have an idea and implement it very, very quickly. So when way back in 1980s, when I was in IIT BHU, people used to say that electronics engineering is something which is to be done and something that has to be done in the lab itself. And we did not have a branch called computer science formally. Only a few institutes in India had branches called BTech in computer science, and BTech in IT was non-existent. Today, IT is the central part of all engineering. It is there everywhere. And why is that so? Because it's an amalgamation, it's a marriage of computer science and communication. So, what from computer science, what from communication engineering or electronics and communication engineering is the ideas that we have. The subject of electronics engineering has developed so much. The components, the circuits have come so that everything, anything, any circuit that you wish to assemble, you have an idea, and all the tools, all the components, all the circuits, all the ICs are available, off the shelf. So everything is available off the shelf. Similarly, in computer science, the languages, especially the programming languages, have developed so much that whatever you wish to write, you can write. What you need is to have an idea. So the idea has come to the fore. It is the central thing in engineering, either in BTech IT or in BTech Electronics and Communication Engineering. What you think as a software comes to be realized in hardware, and both these branches power all other branches of engineering. But then the question is, what is the central idea?
Okay.
So what I'm trying to tell you is the tour or the story which I'm going to tell you today or I'm going to narrate today is that we have had a great legacy in our own country, in our own civilization, about knowledge, about representation of the knowledge, about proving systems, about coding systems, about solving equations, which
Excuse me,
have
sir.
great applications in modern engineering, especially in information technology and electronics and communication. So with this brief
Excuse me, sir.
preamble, yes, please.
Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but actually your voice is very low. Can you please kindly look into it? It's
Okay.
actually not clearly audible.
Is it audible now?
Yes, sir, it's better now.
Okay.
Thank you,
So
sir.
what I'm trying to tell you now is that both everything, all the tools for implementation, from programming language to circuits and components and integrated circuits, are available off the shelf. What is important now today is that you have an idea. You should know how to solve a problem. You should know how to represent a problem. And as soon as you are able to do this, then you are able to do your engineering. And both IT and electronics and communication engineering have thus become pervasive to all other branches of engineering, all other branches of science, all other branches in the society. And hence, what you are going to learn in the next 4 years is something which is very, very important, something which will be interdisciplinary, something which is going to be multidisciplinary, and you are going to really affect the society. But the question is, does it have seeds in our ancient Indian knowledge system? The answer is, what is this story? So let me just go through the story. So let's see what is computer science. And wherever I'm writing computer science, you can also write IT, because IT subsumes computer science and also takes into consideration all communication engineering from electronics and communication. So computer science has two fundamental elements. And what are those elements? Number one, we in computer science try to develop techniques that make the elucidation of computational structure of nature and mind easier. That means we wish to represent the computational nature, how nature computes, how our mind computes. So we wish to understand that, so that we can make a computational machine or a computational structure, so that we are able to do computation easy. And why do we need to compute? Because solving any problem, solving any control problems, you want to control something, you want to process anything, that requires development of techniques which should have a computational structure. And we know that nature and mind are best at doing this. So we try to have techniques that explain how nature works and how the computational structure of mind works actually. This is the first element of computer science. The second element of computer science is not the computational structure itself, but also we wish to create algorithms, that is, the steps and machines that are able to use this computational structure or computational machine to solve problems. So, example, I wish I have a machine which is able to do arithmetic. And I tell that, okay, if you want to do multiplication, it is repeated addition. So this repeated addition part is the algorithm. The machine, which is a computational structure, which has an input, which has an output, which has a processing engine, they constitute the first part, and which constitute the computational structure. And this requires development of representing and manipulating knowledge, because you take data and then you convert that into knowledge. You wish to infer something from data, which is creation of new knowledge. You must be in a position to deduce, and you must be able to hence create and store knowledge. But then, as we go by, we find that we can represent data. How do you represent data? If the data has three attributes, for example, if you have Indian Institute of Information Technology, then their name is one attribute. Another attribute is that is in Prayagraj. Number three attributes, it says it excels in electronics and communication engineering and information technology. It is an institution of national importance. So this data can be represented through its attributes. But how do you represent knowledge? That is a question that needs to be answered, and that is something which is a center of study in computer science. But then again, the same question, but what is data? What is information? What is knowledge? And how do you really differentiate between the two needs to be known. I'll give you an example. And the example is very, very interesting. Just pay attention. We have a piece of data coming that sun rises in the east. So this is a piece of data But does it have any information? The question is, this particular piece of data that the sun rises in the east is a universal truth. And any universal truth is pre-known, a priori known to everyone, and hence contains no information. Okay? I'll take another example. For example, when I say that this building is going to fall in 100 years. As soon as I say this, we all know that the life of a building is not more than 50, 60 years or 70 years at the most. And hence, building going to fall down in 100 years is no new information. So this particular data contains no information. Now, assuming that what I'm saying is correct, and I say that this building is going to fall down in 5 minutes. Okay? So what is the probability of this building going to fall down in 5 minutes? The probability is very, very low. So as soon as I say, and it's a truth, for example, what I'm saying is correct, there's no question of veracity of this particular piece of data, then data whose probability of occurrence is very, very low contains a lot of information. So the uncertainty in the data is the information content. And if you get that, it's a reduction in the uncertainty. For example, I said that the building is going to fall down in 5 minutes. Since the probability of the building going to fall down in 5 minutes is very, very low, and hence this piece of data contains a lot of information. Again, so data is not different from information as regards its representation. But remember that information is inversely proportional to probability of occurrence of that particular data. Now, I take another example. Somebody tells me that onions are selling at 10 rupees a kg. And I know that yesterday they were 50 rupees a kg in this COVID period. But somebody tells me correctly that onions are in the market are selling at 10 rupees a kg. And I find that I have some 20 rupees in my pocket. So what I do is I decide to buy those onions. So I decide to go to the market and buy onions. So this, what I'm doing, there is one piece of information that onions are selling at 10 rupees a kg. There's another piece of information that I have 20 rupees. I just found that I have 20 rupees in my pocket, and I am able to connect two unrelated pieces of information. What are the two unconnected pieces of information? Number one, that onions are selling at 10 rupees per kg, and the second information that I have 20 rupees in my pocket. So I connect the two and I decide to buy onions. So this decision making, my friends, is what is knowledge. So knowledge does not come from outside. Knowledge is something which is created. It's a relation between two unconnected or apparently unconnected piece of data or unconnected piece of information. So when we say that we have knowledge, knowledge is something which is created from within, and it is a relation between two unconnected pieces of information. So the question is, how do we really store or represent this particular knowledge? So the questions are different. Number one, how do we create knowledge? Can there be some process by which we can create knowledge? As soon as we say, okay, we are able to create knowledge, how to represent knowledge? How to create new knowledge by processing knowledge? All these questions are very important from the point of view of computer science. And hence, we find that in our own ancient Indian grammar, the Parnese grammar, these questions were addressed, these questions were answered, and therein lies the answer to our query or our imagination or our curiosity that yes, we had methods, not in the name of computer science, but in the name of grammar, wherein we could represent knowledge, we could process knowledge to create new knowledge, and this was there in many ancient disciplines of India. When I say India, it's not the geographical boundary, it is not whatever we say as India today, but our own culture, our own civilization, which was there right from the inception of this world or inception of this civilization. Our civilization existed, thrived, and created systems which could, and grammar systems which could do with the task of representing and processing knowledge. So let's see how. Why am I saying this? So the persons who were dealing with grammar considered the question of relating facts. What is, if you relate facts and you create a relationship between data pieces of information, then as we said, that this is knowledge. So people started relating facts about the physical world and the cognition, and started representing that in the form of a linguistic expression. And as soon as we started doing this, we said we are creating and representing knowledge. And this is also, as you have seen, is the central idea or the central element of computer science. And how do you really do inferencing on it? How do you really process this particular knowledge? And how do you really represent this knowledge? For that, logicians had already developed formal structures to relate events and to draw inferences. So this function of computer science has its seeds, not in the modern form, but has its seeds in ancient Indian logic and grammar. And as we go by, we'll see that there's more than a hint in the Indian system of knowledge, which actually tells us that yes, people knew this to an not just some basic naive idea, but an advanced idea and a system for formal structures, for proving systems, for drawing inferences, for representing knowledge, for creating knowledge. So the question is, again I read out the question, are there rules in ancient Indian logic and grammar that may be of use in making further advance in cognitive and computer science? Obviously, in IT, the answer is yes. And let's see what. So let's see a programming language. Let's see a programming language. What does a programming language have? You declare the variables, then you have constructs. But very interestingly, if you look at a typical computer language today, talk about C, talk about C++, talk about Python, talk about SQL, talk about so many other languages, all of them are context-free languages. That means there you do not derive meaning from the context. For example, if I am running, then I am running fever, I am running for the election, I am running marathon, I am running for some post. So run has 81 different meanings depending on the context according to Oxford Dictionary. But remember, our computer language has to be exact. The computer language needs to be context-free. We cannot have different meanings depending on the context. But then, and that is one reason why we need to have a computer language, and why don't we work with English or Hindi for writing or writing something for the computer. But then if you want to do natural language processing, and natural language processing is something in which the meaning is derived from the context itself. So was there a system of natural languages which could match or could be as powerful as computing machines? Or can there be a meta language or a grammar which defines the structure, or is it something meta language which actually defines the grammar itself, from which the grammar can be derived, from which the structure of a language can be derived? If yes, then that is something which is very, very important from the point of view of designing compilers, from the point of view of processing some natural languages, from the point of view of defining some formal structures or formal forms from which you can represent knowledge, you can represent data, you can do some processing, you can do some inferencing, you can do some deduction. So let's have a look. So I just read it. Grammars of natural languages as powerful as any computing machine that exists. And what is the observation? But grammar? How can grammar be related to computer? But yes, it is actually related. The formal structure of grammar can easily be adapted to form numerical processing. And let's see, and let's go and see how. Let's see. So those who are not really aware, the Palinese grammar, which he enunciated in Ashtadhyay, said, okay, he said that he was in a penance and the Lord, he just sounded his damru 14 times and he just wrote the 14 sounds as letters. Ayun, Lilrik, Evong, Evoch. And all Sanskrit grammar is derived from that particular 14 sounds. So here is a system in which there is a meta language, just 14 of them, 14 sounds from which all other grammar is derived. So certain rules of Palinese grammar works with Dhatupad, which is a list of verbal roots, and Ganpad, which are various kinds of morphs, one being the Dhatupad. So all Dhatupad and all Ganpad are work with Ashtadhyay, and you don't really need to understand this. The understanding is that you have a meta grammar on top of grammar through which you can do all kinds of analysis. So you can do all kinds of Shabd Anushasan or Shabd Anusheshan on the basis of some meta language which is built on top. So when I say, for example, look at the Sandhi, we say Dirgh Sandhi. So Ayun Lilrik, so Akah Samande Dirgha. If the Ak, if in front of Ak comes Ak, Ayun, A, I, U, then it becomes Dirgh. A becomes A, E becomes E, A becomes I, and that we have already seen in our own language. But this, understand this, that we were talking of a meta language. So in computer science also, can we have a meta language? Can we have an underlying machine, underlying formal representation through which you can generate the entire computer language? And that's what we do in computer science. And by the way, this is not something in the air. At my time, remember in 80s, late 80s, early 90s, Palinese grammar was actually taught at an MTech level, advanced level, to get an understanding of the compiler design, to get an understanding of the formal structure, to get an understanding of context-free grammar. So, due to its algebraic structure and comprehensiveness, the structure has been described as a machine generating word and sentences of Sanskrit. Remember, we have a meta language, just some 14 words and some 4,000 sutras. You are able to derive the entire structure of a language. Remember, the language, it's a natural language processing language. It's a natural language. It has some context. It is not context free. It is context sensitive language. That means depending on the context, you derive the meaning of the word, but it's an exact language. No two words have the same exact meaning. For example, when I say gau, gau means some cow which is sitting. So when a gau is walking, it's no longer gau. I'll give you another example which is really interesting. When I say netra, it pertains to eye. But when I say nayan, then it is not some only eye. It has to do with the liveliness of the eyes. Remember that Sanskrit is an exact language, and the entire language, the entire grammar can be derived from some 14 sounds and some 4,000 sutras. So, if there is a formal system, and why do we need a formal system? Because we wish to represent knowledge. And that contains definitions, theorems or linguistic facts, and some meta theorems, so that we are able to have some grammatical rules. And this is common, and this exists only in Sanskrit, and this is akin to and has parallels with computer system. And not only that, it is not that we are deriving a parallel today. It came first. As I told you, late 80s, early 90s, Pali grammar used to be studied so that we could understand how to build compiler. And I remember that a computer language is context free. There cannot be any context. But if you want to, but here is a language in which context sensitive language is derived out of a structure, of a mathematical structure, out of a formal structure, which is wonderful. So there are rules, some of them are universal, some of them are context sensitive transformations, and they operate sequentially or recursively. And this rule and these set of rules can be expressed in three different groups. Rules of interpretation or meta rules, they are known as paribhasha rules. Rules of affixation, rules which which affixes two kinds of basic dhatu roots, and rules of transformation for stems and suffixes, known as morphophonemic rules. So we have some definitions or interpretation. We have something that we can add, affix, or prefix, and there are rules for transformation. And through this, we generate this structure. And if you see that a computer program has the same general feature of this kind of knowledge. So a computer program, which is limited in the sense that it is written using some context-free language, has the same general structures of a context-sensitive rule, recursion, and sequential rule application. And that is why we find that these sutras have been compared to computer program, and this is how we generate grammar and sentences in Sanskrit. So the grammar is algebraic. It has a finite set of rules which generate an infinite number of words and sentences. So remember, something which was developed thousands of years back has a parallel today. So we should be proud of it. Not just proud. You see, being proud is not sufficient. You should be working on it. You should be improving it. You should be using it to further the knowledge. Nobody is saying that we were better then. No, today we are better, but the seeds were there at that point of time as well. So it is generally believed that Barney system is based on the principle of economy. It's Occam's razor. And this is what describes the structure of the brain as well. So you will find when you are in third year, in your fourth year, or in Professor U.S. Tiwari will be teaching you cognitive systems, how brain thinks, how neural networks work, how does a man work, how does a human mind work. Is that really important? And how do you represent that in the real world? That will be central stage. How can we understand our emotions? How do we understand sentiments? How can we recommend you some movies by understanding your functioning of your brain or your sentiments becomes very, very important. So it's all business, but then it is all there and we are using that. And we see that development of logic also emerges out of these grammatical categories, because through logic only we are in a position to derive things from the meta grammar or the meta set of rules which have been described in ancient Indian grammar. So remember what I said, that the most important thing is that knowledge is something which is not there in the objective world. It is created, it's a relation created from within. So how do you express knowledge? How do you represent knowledge? So grammatical categories serve to express knowledge about the world. So you already have a method, and we see that this particular method is being used in modern world as well. So Panini systems of knowledge representation is based in Karak theory. So not really important. The only thing which is important is that Karak are deep structure relations. So it's a relations, something not which is objective, does not exist in the world. For example, that you are sitting on a chair, but chairness, the property of chairness does not exist in this world. You cannot look and say this is the property of the chair. I'll give you an example. Suppose you say that this is a chair. I would say, what is a chair? You would say something which has two hand rests or arm rests. I said can be chair with an armrest, without an armrest. You say that the chair always has a back. I'll say there's a backless chair. You say that it has a place to sit. I'll say there are chairs used for medical purposes which does not have a bottom. So what is a chair? We do not know where is a chair. What is a chair? We cannot really define chair by its attributes, but we know what is a chair when we see one. So it's something which is a figment of imagination. The chairness is a figment of imagination. So how do you represent that? So these are relations. You relate different parts, but that relation, that universal, is really absent. It does not exist in this world. So this deep structure relations that mediate mappings from semantic relations, agent goal, to phonological representation in terms of voices, etc., via surface structures, is how we represent or express knowledge. You need not really understand or really be able to appreciate this, but Karak theory is of importance in natural language processing, and this occupies a central place in Indian systems of knowledge, in Buddhist philosophy, in Jain philosophy, in ancient Indian philosophy, and especially in grammar. So the problems of particular interest to computer science include arrangement of rules, how to write rules. What is the smallest set of rules which is equivalent to some other rule? So how do you really make the rules concise so that there's no baggage, is given in Ashtadhyayi. And these rearranged rules were studied in Siddhant Kaumudi, and those who have studied Sanskrit in class 12 would have studied some portion, some things of Siddhant Kaumudi. All grammar or all Sanskrit which is taught is actually from Siddhant Kaumudi today, and these rearranged rules can be seen there. Let's go further and see what is happening. So, as I said, that Panini is meta language, and what was that meta language? Those 14 sounds which were from the Lord Shiva's Damru, and as he writes and just wrote them, that's the history. That's the recorded history, and 4,000 sutras. And this forms a meta language. And through this particular meta language, the entire vocabulary, the entire syntax, the entire grammar is created. So it's an algebra actually, and it's a set together with rule, which is called an algebra, and it extensively uses abbreviated expressions and other devices to have an appearance of a code language. So this particular idea that there is a state machine behind and there's a meta language behind, the set of rules which actually generate the vocabulary, the syntax, and the grammar, is akin to modern computer science languages or computer families languages. Now, some other observations. What are these observations? That there are several formal features of Parni's grammar that have direct parallels in computer science. And we are able to represent knowledge uniquely. So there's no ambiguity in the knowledge representation. So you cannot have two interpretations, which is a problem in natural language processing. Remember that in natural language, the meaning is derived from the context. As I said, I'm running in a marathon, I'm running for an election, I'm running fever, all I have a running nose. All of them have different meaning of running because of its context. But knowledge representation needs to be unique. And Parni's grammar gives you a way for knowledge representation which is central to computer science and gives you a knowledge representation technique. And we'll see this in a moment, but then let's look at other things as well. Was grammar the only thing that we have? The answer is no. So we start looking at data structures. And when we start looking at data structures, we find that hashing is very, very important. So what is hashing? You will study in your second semester or probably in first semester, and some of you may have, or most of you may have studied in class 12 also. But this is just a mathematical function used in databases to generate indices, used in cryptography, used in for example, in cryptocurrency. All of you have heard about or seen Bitcoin or Ethereum or different cryptocurrencies have come into being, and hashing is central to it. So a cryptographic hash is central to these cryptocurrency, is central to databases, and in another form is central into signal processing as well. When we say that we have CDMA phones, then hashing in another form is actually central to code division multiple access. It is central to coding theory. It is central to modern day 4G, 5G phones. The technique is everywhere, and the technique is very simple, very powerful. But did we have anything here? So we found that this particular hashing system existed in some form in music, actually, in our ancient civilization. See, the music, which is something which is voice, which is something which is audio, could be represented, and the hashing system known as Cut-Pair system is a system for expressing numbers through the use of letters. And especially when there's more than one synonym for each number, then we could use this particular scheme for representing numbers. And I do not say that hashing was full blown and hashing as it is known today or it is practiced today existed, but people knew hashing, people could apply hashing, people could actually use this particular. So hashing is nothing but a mapping which you study in it's a many to one mapping, and this many to one mapping or interjective mapping existed and was being used in a big way in our Indian society. So this scheme, as I told you, existed in South Indian musicology, and it is similar to modern hashing techniques. As I said, which is galore in cryptography, it's galore in Bitcoin, it is galore in other blockchain methods which are most modern. It is there in computer science, it's there in signal processing, it's there everywhere. And this particular scheme can be treated as an early precursor to modern hash functions. And it is really, really close to the modern hash tables. And now I move to something which is very interesting, something which I had left here, the Parnese language. So I just return to it and give you some observations from this particular form. As I said, you need to represent knowledge. Why do you need to represent knowledge? Because knowledge is a relation which is intangible, needs a proper representation technique. And you can process this knowledge, this particular knowledge, that is the representation, for generating new knowledge through the process of deduction, through the process of inference, and this is important. So Houston in 1991, in one of his writings, says that what he writes about Sanskrit, it was perfectly clear to me that I had come to a perfect language, a language that invokes the spirit, an inexhaustible wellspring of spiritual inspiration. We leave aside this spiritual inspiration, but where did it come from? A language which is infinitely more sophisticated than any of the modern tongues. And it is more sophisticated than just not the natural languages, but also computer languages. And see, we have, where does it come from? It comes from the meta structure, as I told you. It comes from the formalism and the structure of storage and representation of knowledge. So, as I said, that we could really, from computer science point of view, we have a theory of formal languages. And the word formal is that refers to the fact that all the rules of the language are explicitly stated in terms of some strings or symbols would occur. Remember, if you look at Hindi, you look at English, there's the grammars are there, and more than the grammar rules, there are exceptions to those rules. And more than the exceptions, there are conventions. You say that a and will come before any vowel, but it does not come somewhere, it comes somewhere. You have some rule which is not followed at some place. As I said, you have more exceptions than you have rules. You have more conventions than you have these exceptions. So the language is not bound in a formal way. So what we want in a language like computer language, it cannot be, we cannot have exceptions, you cannot have conventions, you cannot have exceptions to rules, but rules should be complete in every way. And they should be mathematically verifiable for not being ambiguous. So the word formal represents to the fact that all rules for the language are explicitly stated. All rules are explicitly stated, and they are represented without any ambiguity and without any interpretation. There should not be any context sensitive interpretation, and there should be unambiguous. And the language grammar especially has a rich inflectional structure. As I told you, it is exact. The grammar is perfect. The entire language, the syntax, the vocabulary, the rules are derived from a set of initial meta rules. So, what happened in computer? What happens in compiler is that when we write write one line of computer code, it gets interpreted or gets interpreted or compiled by the compiler. And what does it do it? It represents it in a form. The original form was known as the BNF form, and which came from the name of John Backus and Peter Nord, 1958 and 1963 itself. And the language that they created was known as Algol 60. And they said it's a language suitable for expressing a large number of numerical processes in a form sufficiently concise for direct automatic translation from the language to the computer language, or for processing within a computer, without ambiguity, without the need for further context-sensitive interpretation, but that would lead to a lot of ambiguity. So they defined what is known as the BNF form. It is known as Backus norm form, and notation you will study when you go to your third year study, or in the second year when you are studying theory of computation, and you will be studying what is a grammar, what is a context-sensitive grammar, and what is context-free grammar, what is a lemma, what is a pumping lemma. all these, what is a Turing machine, you will be studying that in second year itself, and you will be studying that this particular BNF or Backus-Naur form is a way to represent the language so that it can be translated from one language to another computer understandable form without any ambiguity, without any need for any further interpretation. However, the exact thing was existing in our own grammatical systems as well. So Parney invented a notation for representing knowledge which is equivalent to that of Backus, and there are similar properties. For example, when you define that particular form, you identify structures equivalent to Backus. For example, I, and then use of meta brackets, which are angle brackets, to enclose suggestive names. I'm not going to details of how BNF form is there. I could have done that. But then what I'm trying to tell you is that the grammar representation of Parani in Ashtadhyay has an equivalence and existed at that particular point of time. Though as of today, we really don't use BNF, but it has its seeds, and we can see that people at our time, the ancient Indian knowledge system, had these not just in a very, very native or seed form, it was really developed for some application. And as we move, what is the field which is really, really important today? It's natural language processing. We are trying to understand different languages. We are trying to translate between different languages. We are trying to understand linguistics. Through that, we are trying to understand how human being works. We are trying to understand, and we are trying to do some cognitive modeling. We are trying to make cognitive systems. And as I said, there are labs here which work in this particular area, and they benefit from the knowledge of this particular thing. Not just, pardon me, but as late as 10th century, Bhartrihari also had this particular meta language describing the language itself. So it's a grammar of grammar which was defined by Bhartrihari also. And this exists in a very, very, not just native form, in a very developed form, my friends. So, as I said, to just tell you that Parni's grammar, which came in 6th century BC, provides 4,000 rules, 14 sutras. And they describe the entire grammar in terms of finite set of rules. And the grammar represents not just one language, but a universal grammatical and computing system. So people as late as 1988 observed that something which came in 6th century BC is universal, is actually describes a universal grammar and a computing system at that. And Professor S. Kark, if you read his book, and I'll be giving you links of his book, which say that they had anticipated the logical framework of modern computers. In 1993, they said, okay, people were able to appreciate and understand binary numbers. So Pingle had actually understood, but had applied it to classify Vedic meters. So there were application in something which was really important, because knowledge used to pass from one generation to another generation through the process of Shruti. There was nothing written, and hence the audio processing was very important. And to classify Vedic meters, Pingle had devised binary numbers. Though again, as I said, it is not really used and was not the same as what is being used today in our own binary system on our computers. But remember, they knew it and they were using it in a different, very important applications. Then, as we go by, we are in an era of machine learning today. If you look at machine learning, my friends, it says that it processes data about movies, It processes data about recommendation systems. It says that, okay, I'll give you an example, very famous Netflix example, or Netflix challenge as known as. It says that if somebody has watched movies, you have watched and liked movies, and other people have liked and watched movies, so the people watch movies on Netflix, then can we really tell that this movie which has a this genre, for example, it's an action movie, it's a genre action, it has these people, these actresses, these are actors, it's an action movie with this story, with this director, can we predict whether this particular movie will be liked by Shekhar Verma or not, or will be liked by someone or not? So it's kind of a recommendation system. And this was a 10 million Netflix challenge, and people used machine learning to solve and win this particular prize. And today, machine learning, deep learning techniques are solving problems for designing a vaccine, to making recommendations for you on Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hotstar, or recommending products to you on Amazon or on Flipkart, or better still on Facebook, which is for old people, is also makes recommendations of who can you be your friends. But they can also suggest friends on Insta, or they can give some recommendations for particular tweet on Twitter. So machine learning is everywhere, and says, or what does it say? We work on data. And remember, we make an assumption saying that data may or may not lie in the Euclidean world. So the data may be lying in a non-Euclidean world. It may be lying on a manifold which is non-Euclidean. What is non-Euclidean? For example, something which is lying on the curve of Earth. So since it is not on the Euclidean plane, the sum of the angles of the triangle will not sum to 180 degrees. So it may exceed 180 degrees on a curved surface. Or similar triangles have to be congruent, which is not there in the Euclidean world. So this in Srirantra, and many people have their Srirantra at their homes. So it has 43 little triangles, and it has 9 triangles inscribed within a circle. And remember, is made both on flat and curved surface. And if you look at the curved surface, the triangles do not change, but the triangles are made on a curved surface, and the total sum of the angles are more than 180. And this indicates that people had knowledge of non-Euclidean geometry, which we were studying then. Look at our mandir. If you look at the mandir in Kashi Vishwanath, you look at Lingaraj temple, look at previous mandirs, it has, if you see, it has some round shaped domes all around. Look at Meenakshi temple at round shaped domes. That speaks of a geometry which is known as Riemannian or differential geometry. So there are Riemannian manifold or some Riemannian geometry which actually governs those structures. And we find that those structures are highly stable, those structures are really, really reliable, and thus we say that people had the knowledge of non-Euclidean geometry and applied it. And what we are doing today in machine learning is trying to exploit this non-Euclidean geometry for better inference, for better classification, and for better recommendation systems, for better marketing systems in computer world. So people knew this and were using it for some other purpose, but religion is not something that is important. What is important is that it has applications agnostic of religion, agnostic of a particular language. So that piece of information is important for us, that yes, if you look back, people did have these systems for representing knowledge, deduction from that knowledge, inference from that knowledge system to create more knowledge. Now, we switch from grammar and we switch from Ashtadhyayi and we shift from formal systems to something which is very, very interesting and forms the background of modern computing, forms the background of a problem which is there in electronics engineering as well. So, for example, when we say that we have a Boolean circuit, and everybody of all of us know what is a Boolean circuit, we say, can we predict by looking at a circuit that it will have for what kind of inputs it will have, it will be satisfied? So it's a very crude way I'm saying. I'm not giving you the correct or the exact problem or the exact definition, but we have what is known as a Boolean satisfiability problem. So let's look at what is there in the slide. Suppose we have a large group of students that we need to pair up to work on projects. We know that which students are compatible with each other and we want to put them in compatible groups of 2. So if you are connecting or we are just finding out all pairs, then even for 40 students, we'll have 300 billion trillion possible pairings, because the total number of pairings will be very, very large. So we say, so the problem is really blowing up. So do we have an algorithm for solving this particular problem? Or do we need to do it in a brute force manner and do an exhaustive search? So Jack Edmonds in 1965 gave an efficient algorithm to solve this matching problem. So this is a matching problem and can be used as for finding out the best pairs for marriage as well. And he said that if you have an algorithm that runs in small amount of time, or we say that in polynomial time, we say that these are known as P class of problems. But many problems do not have an efficient algorithm. I'll give you an example which is close to our heart, and we know that this problem, and we have been studying this problem right from class 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, but we do not know about this problem, did not appreciate it. What is the problem? Suppose we say that we have a number. We have a number, large number, and we wish to do prime number factorization. So if you have a number 10, the prime numbers are 2 into 5. If you have a number, say 35, then you have 5 into 7. If you have a number 70, the prime factors is 2 into 5 into 7. If you have 91, it's 13 into 7. But if you want to do prime number factorization, do we have an algorithm? No, we don't have an algorithm for doing it. What we do is multiply it by 2, divide it by 2, see whether it's the order even. If not, divide it by 3. If not, divide it by 5. If not, divide it by 7. So what we are doing is, we are doing some brute force technique. So we don't have an algorithm for doing it. We are doing some exhaustive brute force technique. And these problems are said to fall in NP class. And what happens is that these NP class of problems, which are known as non-deterministic polynomial time, and you'll be studying that in your 3rd semester, or study here in theory of computation, and 4th semester in algorithms course, we find that those problems, for example, finding out a large group of students who are compatible with each other, which is known as a clique. You form a graph and then find out. If you want to make a group of 3 students with each pair of students in each group compatible, which is partitioned into triangles, and such prime factorization problems, all these problems have a similar flavor. What is that flavor? That they do not have a solution in polynomial time. You don't have an algorithm. But if you know that 70 is equal to 2 into 5 into 7, verifying this is very easy. So verification is efficient. Solving this problem is tough, and these are known as non-deterministic polynomial time. So verification that the factorization of a number is 2 into 5 into 7 is very easy, you just multiply. But finding out the prime factors is an exhaustive brute force method. So suppose I give you a 400 digit number, then it will take you some years for you to do this, because you'll keep on doing it 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19, 23, 31, so on and so forth. And it'll take years because it's a 400 digit number. But if I give you the prime factors, you just need to multiply, and that's quick. So these efficiently verify solutions fall into the class of NP. And non-deterministic polynomial time, if you wish to ask this. Why I am saying this? Because some biological problems, like finding out a DNA sequence that best fits a collection of fragments of a sequence, also is an NP complete problem. The prime factorization problem, as I told you, is an NP complete problem. And there are problems galore in biology, in engineering, in computer science, in electronics and communication engineering, which fit the bill. And these are known as hard problems. And cryptographic methods or cryptography, which is used for security in networks, uses the hardness that it is very hard to solve the problem, very easy to verify the solution is what is used. For example, the RSA algorithm, which is used, or the variant of the elliptic curve cryptography, which is used in your phone for security, or for example, for end-to-end security in WhatsApp, the cryptographic methods that we use this particular or exploit this hardness. You will be studying that in your 7th semester, wherein you have a course on cryptography. But then, again, I return to your class 4th, wherein we were doing prime number factorization. And as we went to class 5th and 6th, we were trying to find out the highest common factor. How do we do the highest common factor? By factorizing the first number and by doing the prime number factorization of the second number, finding out what are the common prime numbers, prime factors, multiplied them together to find out the GCD or the HCF. The greatest common divisor or the highest common factor being one and the same. So GCD requires finding out the factorization. It requires factorization, which is an NP hard problem, which is difficult to do because it needs brute force. Friends, therein we have a solution given by Aryabhat to find out the GCD in polynomial time. He gave an algorithm. But let's see one more problem. For suppose Alice, husband Bob, is working on a Sudoku puzzles, and she says that she has a solution. But Sudoku puzzle is an NP complete problem. So if Alice claims that she has a solution, and can she reveal the solution without giving the solution? This is what a zero knowledge proof. I can tell you that I know a solution to a problem without telling you the solution. This is known as zero knowledge proof. And this requires working on the GCD. And this requires work using the hardness. So the hardness for cryptography uses NP complete problems and requires formal proof methods. So do we have hints of this in our ancient knowledge system? The answer is yes. So from now on, I'll just give you hints of what are there. I'll not be just, as I told you, I'm just telling you a story. I'll not be going into details. So there is a remainder theorem due to Aryabhat, known as Aryabhat remainder theorem, which is used in public key cryptography, which is better than, and which involves solving an equation. And solving an indeterminate equation. For example, you have ax plus by is equal to c. See this equation? Does it sound familiar? Yes, it is familiar. It is an extended Euclidean algorithm. For example, you have two numbers x and y, or two numbers a and b, and we know that we know the GCD, then ax plus by is equal to c, where C is the GCD of the two numbers or the SCF of the two numbers. And Aryabhat gave a method, gave an algorithm to solve this seemingly hard problem which required prime number factorization, gave a solution which for solving such equations, which is known as Aryabhat-Remender theorem. Which, my friends, there are other theorems also which are used now, but Aryabhat is still the best theorem and the best way of solving this particular problem. One of the best, though it's not really popular now, but then we use it. So the extension is to solve a set of equations. So we have an equation x modulo m1 is equal to x1, x modulo m2 is equal to x2. X is a number which is modulo m1, that means you divide it by m1, take the remainder, which is equal to x1. X modulo some other number is x2, x modulo some number m3 is x3, and Aryabhat gave an algorithm to solve this for a two case, that is x modulo m1 is equal to x1, x modulo m2 is equal to x2. Can we solve this? Aryabhat said yes and gave an algorithm for solving it. So, and the algorithm known as Kuttak, this Kuttak algorithm was given by Aryabhat to solve the indeterminate equations of the form ax plus by is equal to c, where x and y are unknown quantities, a, b, and c are known quantities, where a and b are the numbers, c is the GCD of the two numbers. Can we find out x and y such that ax plus by is equal to c? And Kuttak algorithm was able to solve this. And as I just quote, and I'll not be reading it. So the algorithm was originally invented in 550 CE, in the year of the Lord, and Bhaskarachar in 600 to 680 AD has given a detailed description with several examples, and this is the algorithm which is known as Kuttak algorithm. Here is the algorithm. It's written in old Sanskrit. I'll not be dealing with it, but here is an algorithm for confirmation. The Kuttak algorithm, as I told you, is precursor to the modern extended Euclidean algorithm. For solving this, this is the problem given by Euclidean, and it is used in cryptography in a great way. But remember, the solution was already given in Kuttak, and this Kuttak algorithm is identical to this particular problem. So, Aryabhat-Remender theorem says that we can solve such equations ax plus by is equal to 1, and you could solve for t such equations, we could solve this particular problem. And this particular problem, known as Aryabhat-Remender theorem, has its parallels in Chinese Remender theorem and Garner's theorem, which is used in public key cryptography, which is used in our phones today, and computer and network everywhere. In addition to that, Aryabhat gave a sign table. He gave us a sign table wherein he said, okay, what is the ratio of the radius and the chord? So he gave us a table, which is, he says, as the Aryabhat table, and this is the sign table which he has described in Sanskrit, Makhi, Makhi, Phaki, Thaki, and so on and so forth, written in Vedic Sanskrit. And he could explain the numerical system for expressing the sign. So here is the sign table, and I'm just telling you because this type of sign table is used in our own calculations as well. Then he said that yes, Bhaskaracharya gave an approximate value of the sign. Today we have a series for sin x or sin theta, but he gave an approximation and said, okay, this p was considered to be 10, but Bhaskaracharya said it has to be an irrational number. This, see, it's not an infinite series, it's just an expression of sine x. And where p is an irrational value and it was found to be surprisingly close to the actual value of sine x. And then the different sutras, Lop Sthapna Sutra, Anupriya Sthapna Sutra, and other sutra, they could solve simultaneous equations. Why I'm telling you solving simultaneous equations? Because simultaneous equations are represented as matrix, and matrices today form the background of all machine learning, all deep learning. We deal with systems, we deal with eigenvalues, eigenvectors, and the solution of these set of simultaneous equations form the background of all modern machine learning. And see, look at Jain mathematics. Jains say that just we had only infinites, but they say, okay, infinites can be countable or innumerable, innumerable numbers, infinite numbers. So they said, okay, infinite in one direction, infinite in two directions, infinite in area, infinite everywhere, and they go and connect it to religion saying infinite perpetually. So the idea of zero, the idea of infinity, and different kinds of infinity and types of infinity were studied and understood in ancient India. And not just that, when we are thinking of very large numbers, then Yajurved Samhita says, okay, hail to 100, hail to 1000, hail to 10,000, hail to trillion, and then they go beyond, say, hail to Swarg, hail to Mrityalok, hail to all. So they were having understanding of representation of very large numbers, and they understood and could understand large numbers. And finally, why do we study proofs? We know that proof is a primary vehicle for knowledge generation through inference, through deduction in mathematics. And in computer science, proof has an additional use. What's that use? It verifies whether a particular system, component, or algorithm has certain desirable properties or not. For example, if you have a compiler, you have an operating system which can be proved to be impregnable or proved to be without ambiguity, then it will never have errors. There will be no memory leakage. It will not throw exceptions. It will not crash. Somebody from outside will not be able to enter into the system and steal things. So it will give you a bulletproof security. So for that, proof is very important in computer science. One can practice computer science and do it successfully if you are just doing coding without studying proofs. But you need to reason. You should have formal proofs. All kinds of algorithms, codes, distributed systems, security protocols need to have formal proofs. And for that, proving is important. So, why am I telling you all these things? So, Krishna Devagya said that is proof important? And they started talking of Uppatti as which is nothing but a proof. So, the following passage from Krishna Devagya commentary on Bij Ganit, which is algebra, brings a general understanding of Indian mathematician, citing favorable instances. They say that if you have favorable instances, even infinite of them, they cannot be taken as proof. So 100 positive examples don't make a proof. You need a formal proof or demonstration or upapatti as it's known in Sanskrit, or even in our own mathematics at class 10th or class 12th, then only you can accept something as valid. Remember, the only thing, if you see hundreds of instances of something happening, it is not sufficient as a proof, is something which is testimony to the knowledge of those people. So, what Bhaskarachar writes of upatti or proof, it says the approximate value of the ratio of circumference to the diameter, even if the approximate value are given, the exact value of cannot be given. He says that you know the value of pi. It says that the ratio of the circumference to the diameter cannot be given. and he gives a
कितना टाइम
proof.
लगे?
So once he gives the proof for it,
पूरे खत्म कर देते हैं.
kindly mute your microphones, please. Then again,
खत्म
he
होगा.
gives a proof for Pythagoras theorem. So he gives a geometrical proof for Pythagoras theorem, followed by an algebraic proof for Pythagoras theorem, and says so what he says is that you need to have a proof and then gives a proof. Similarly, Krishnadeva gives a proof for the Kuttak process of the remainder theorem from Aryabhata. He gives a proof of it. So everything needed required a positive proof to be accepted. It's not just the demonstration, it's not just large number of positive examples that were treated as proof. So, and then what it says, very interesting, that tark, which is proof by contradiction, cannot be taken as a proof unto itself. So he says the method of proof by contradiction, which is known as tark in Indian logic, cannot be taken as a complete proof. So Krishnadeva says that to employ tark or proof by contradiction, he tries to prove that the square root of a negative number does not exist, or negative number has no root. But what he says that here is the proof. But what he says that proof by contradiction, or what is known as reductio ad absurdum, cannot be used or cannot be accepted as an independent pramana or independent proof. It has to only be to support some positive inference. So we know that formal method for proving, which we study in our own software systems, which are the study we study in algorithms, which we study in theory of computation, was known. And this is something which is very important, that people had been working right from ancient times, and what we see around us in computer science, in IT, in electronics and communication is something that's not something novel, something that does not come from the Western world. It had seeds here also. Before I end, I just wish to show a rhythm of life. So there is a hymn from Ved which says, fire having become speech entered the mouth, air becoming scent entered the nostrils, the sun becoming sight entered the eyes, the regions becoming hearing entered the ears, the plants becoming hairs entered the skin, the moon having become mind entered the heart. So it says that there is a connection between the external world and our own cognitive center, something that we are trying to build today, something cognitive system that we are trying to build today, something that we are trying to do in computer science and all interdisciplinary, from psychology to medical world to computer science to signal processing to communication. We are trying to do just that, connecting the internal to the external. Thank you, my friends. I think I have been able to keep my rendezvous with time. It's just 5:51, 5:52. I'm open for questions, if any. I hope you have enjoyed this story, and I would request if Dr. Nitish is there, that will be great. Dr. Nitish?
Yes, sir. Sir Muskan would like to take some questions from the students
Please,
and
please.
request you to please respond.
Yes, sir.
First of all, I would like to thank you, sir, for such an insightful session. We often turn a blind eye towards success stories of our own country and aspire to follow the footsteps of the Western world. However, this session has truly been an eye-opener, and IIIT being an IT-oriented institution, This talk was really relevant, and I am sure that all of us can learn a lot from it. Now we can move on to the question and answer session. If anyone has a question, you can please write it in the chat box and I'll convey it to sir. Please write your queries in the chat box if you have any.
I think, Muskan, there are no questions. However, what I'll do is I'll pass on some literature from our own, from some professors in India, some professors abroad who have been studying the Indian knowledge system and developed appreciation for the same. And that will also form a sort of a text for this particular lecture. And I'll pass it on to Professor Nitish Purohit. And I think he'll be in a position to pass it on to our first year students. Some literature on how whatever I have said, some formal literature exists. And so there are some questions. So why are we not using Sanskrit in programming? See, Sanskrit is a context sensitive language. It is exact language, but it's concept sensitive, number one. It was made for human beings. It is not made for computers. Computers use context-free languages. What I'm trying to tell you is that the exactness of this and the meta grammar that exists is being used and can be used for doing better natural language processing, to develop languages which are better. There were computer languages which are closer to human beings, but using some system which existed for human beings is not all that wise. We should be learning from our system, not using them and adapting them to other systems. Yes. Okay, there is another question which says, what is deep learning? So I'll try to answer this question, what is deep learning? So what we say is, remember in class 10th and 12th, sorry, not in 10th and 12th, in class 8th, we were said, okay, whatever mathematics exists is actually addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Now, if you want, so what is knowledge and what is learning? No, learning is what? Learning is taking some representation, changing that representation into a human understandable representation. So what does deep learning do is, it takes a lot and lot of data to learn a knowledge representation. And it does not rely a priori on anything. So it learns the features, it learns the input-output mapping based on data, and creates a knowledge representation on the basis of particulars only. So what it does, it takes data which are particulars, creates a universal class or a representation. And this it does with a lot and lot of data. And this is when we use this in a formal manner, we call it deep learning. And we use deep learning all the way nowadays. And probably when you come to your own third year and fourth year, probably you all will be using, a lot of you will be using deep learning either in electronics and communication engineering or IT or everywhere when you go to the industry. Another question, sir, do you need to learn advanced mathematics to make these systems better, you talked about? The answer is yes. You need to learn formal methods. You need to learn to solve indeterminate equations. You need to learn number theory to be able to understand and make a dent into these systems which existed. Not only that, you need to have a good understanding of the language also to be able to understand and further these systems. Question, machine learning and deep learning are same? Not really. Deep learning is actually a subset of machine learning, but it is becoming so big that it is having a life of its own. So you can say, okay, deep learning is separate, but it is not really different. So in machine learning, what we do is, the human beings or the machine does not do any feature extraction. In machine learning, the feature extraction is done by manually, whereas in deep learning, the feature extraction and the learning process, both of them are done by the machine. So that's a slight difference. but I think the difference is not so significant. Any other question? Muskan,
Sir, I can't see any more questions. I guess that will be it.
I think
And-
there are no other questions.
Yes, sir. So I guess we can conclude the session, and I would once again like to thank you for such insightful session.
I thank
And-
Dr. Nitish Purohit for having given this opportunity to me for addressing the students and to share my whatever little I know about the ancient system knowledge system. Thank you, Dr. Nitish. Thank you, students.
Yes, sir.